That's very cute.
A 90-pound Red Doberman spent 5 years with one family. 5 years of loyalty, 5 years of love. And then one Tuesday morning, they dropped him at a shelter and drove away without looking back. No goodbye, not even a second glance. The reason? A baby was coming, and they decided Tino was too much. But what they never knew is what that same Doberman did 4 months later at 3:17 in the morning, and why a police officer stood in a woman's kitchen and told her that dog was the only reason they were having that conversation at all. This is that story. Charlotte Rumser was 34 years old, a former marketing coordinator living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Miami, Florida. She worked from her laptop mostly at night after the baby went to sleep. She had a small balcony she never used anymore, a kitchen table built for 4 that she sat at alone every morning, and a coffee mug that said "Good morning" that she found deeply ironic at 5:47 every single day. She was a single mother, recently divorced, and the silence in that apartment followed her from room to room like something she couldn't shake no matter what she did. But before we get to Tino, you need to understand how Charlotte got here. Because the reason she was sitting alone in Miami, the reason her marriage fell apart, was a dog. Not a Red Doberman, a 7-pound, long-coat Chihuahua named Cleo. Cleo had been there through 2 apartment moves, 1 job change, and the night Charlotte's mother called with news that changed everything. Cleo had slept on her chest that entire night and hadn't moved until morning. That's the kind of dog Cleo was. Daniel never liked her. He tolerated Cleo the way some people tolerate a slightly too loud restaurant, choosing not to say anything but never really comfortable either. Then Charlotte got pregnant, and Daniel made his position very clear. "The dog goes," he said. "We are not raising a baby around that animal." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. Cleo has never hurt anyone in her life. She could. "Daniel, she weighs 7 pounds. It's not about the weight, it's about the risk. I'm not negotiating this." But Charlotte wasn't negotiating either, because Cleo wasn't just a pet to her. Cleo was the reason she made it through the hardest year of her life without completely falling apart. And she wasn't going to hand her over to a shelter because her husband had decided to be afraid of something he'd never once actually tried to understand. The fights started slow. Then they weren't slow anymore. 8 months pregnant, the marriage was done. Daniel moved out first. Charlotte followed, all the way to Miami, where she had a college friend, a spare room offer, and exactly 0 plan beyond getting through the next 30 days. She brought Cleo. Of course, she brought Cleo. Her son Eli was born on a Thursday in October, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Loud from the very first second. Charlotte called her mother from the hospital with one hand and held Eli with the other, and cried for about 20 minutes straight. Happy tears, scared tears. She still isn't totally sure which was which. The first months were hard in the way that first months always are, but harder. Because there was no one to hand the baby to at 2 a.m. No one to say, "I've got him, go sleep." Just Charlotte. Cleo curled up at the end of the bed, and whatever energy she had left after the last feeding. Some mornings she sat at that kitchen table, just her and a cup of coffee already going cold, and felt the weight of that silence like something sitting across from her in an empty chair. She wasn't unhappy exactly. She just felt like something was missing, something she couldn't name yet. She wasn't looking for another dog. She was barely holding the life she already had together. And then, on a Sunday afternoon in March, during Eli's nap, she saw the post. She was scrolling through her phone, doing that half-awake thing where you're not really reading anything, just moving your thumb. And then she stopped completely. A photo of a Red Doberman, sitting alone in a corner of a shelter kennel. His back was to the camera just slightly, like he wasn't sure whether being seen was even worth the risk anymore. His name was Tino, and the caption said something that made Charlotte set her phone down on the table and just sit there. Tino spent 5 years with his family. He was surrendered last week because a new baby is on the way, and the family felt he was too energetic, too possessive, too much. He is none of those things. He is just a dog who doesn't understand why the people he loved left. Charlotte read it twice, then picked her phone up and read it a third time, because she knew exactly how that felt. Not the shelter part, but the rest of it. Being decided about, being labeled too much by someone who was supposed to stay. She sat there for a long time after that. Eli was still asleep, Cleo was on the couch, the apartment was quiet. And then Charlotte did something her college friend called insane, her mother called reckless, and that she called the first right decision she'd made in a very long time. She called the shelter. "He's 90 pounds, the coordinator told Rosa. "He's been here 43 days and he's struggling with the adjustment. He was completely home-raised his entire life. He's never been a stray. He genuinely doesn't understand where he is or why he's there." "I have a 10-month-old, Charlotte said. Silence on the other end of the line. "Miss Mercer, I know what you're thinking, but I also know what it feels like to be called too much and left behind anyway. I'd like to meet him first." She drove to the shelter the next morning with Eli in the car seat and Cleo in the back. Rosa walked her to kennel 14. Tino was in the far corner, same position as the photo, big, red and tan, 90 pounds of Doberman who had clearly decided that getting his hopes up just wasn't worth it anymore. Charlotte crouched down in front of the kennel. "Hey." Tino turned his head slowly, looked at her, then looked down at Eli in the carrier on her chest, then looked back up at Charlotte. And then, slowly, he stood up, walked to the kennel door, and pressed his enormous head sideways against the bars. Not barking, not jumping, just there. Charlotte felt her throat tighten. She signed the adoption papers 40 minutes later. Rosa walked her out with a look on her face that was somewhere between admiration and genuine concern. Charlotte appreciated both. The first week was loud and completely chaotic. Tino knocked a lamp over in the first hour, purely by existing in the same room as it. He discovered that Charlotte's couch was exactly the right size for a 90-pound Doberman and claimed it before she had even finished the tour. He had exactly one personal rule in that apartment from day one. He was never, under any circumstances, going to be in a different room than Charlotte or Eli. Not once, not for a single second. Charlotte thought that would drive her absolutely crazy. It didn't, because here's the thing nobody told her about Tino. Underneath all that energy and all that size was a brain that had spent 5 years learning one family and was now starting all over again, learning Charlotte, learning Eli, learning the layout of that apartment the way someone memorizes a map before a very important trip they can't afford to get wrong. By day 3, she noticed something. Every single morning before Eli woke up, Tino did a slow, deliberate walk through the entire apartment. Living room, kitchen, balcony door check, Eli's room, front door, then back to Eli's room. Every single morning, in the exact same order, like a checklist, like a job nobody gave him but he'd decided was his anyway. And Eli, that boy was not afraid of Tino for one single second, not from the very first morning. The day after Tino came home, Eli pulled himself up on the edge of the coffee table, wobbled across the living room floor on unsteady legs, and walked directly to where the Doberman was lying. He grabbed a full fist of Tino's ear with both hands and laughed that big, full-body baby laugh. Tino went completely still. He turned his enormous head slowly toward Charlotte with an expression that said very clearly, "I have absolutely no idea what to do right now, but I am choosing patience." Then he laid his head back down on the floor. Eli sat down right next to him. And that was the entire introduction. No adjustment period, no drama. Best friends, just like that. By the end of week 2, Tino had developed a habit that Charlotte still cannot explain and has completely stopped trying to. Every evening around bath time, without fail, Tino would find Eli's left sock. Just the left one, never the right. He would carry it carefully across the apartment to the kitchen and place it beside his food bowl. He would not eat until the sock was there. Charlotte started hiding the sock in different places every single day just to watch what would happen. Under the couch, behind the door, inside a shoe. Didn't matter. He always found it. Left sock, kitchen floor, every single night. Like clockwork. She called it his good luck charm. She still does. Cleo, for her part, accepted Tino the way a long-tenured senior employee accepts an enthusiastic new hire. With patience, occasional pointed side-eye, and eventually something that looked a lot like real affection. By week 3, the little Chihuahua was sleeping pressed against the Doberman's side like she'd always done it. Nobody in that apartment was cold anymore. 4 months passed. The apartment had stopped feeling so quiet. Charlotte was sleeping better. She'd started applying for jobs again. She was making plans in a way she hadn't been able to do in almost a year. Then, one evening in late July, her neighbor knocked on her door with a look on his face she didn't like. "You hear about the Garcias, down on the corner? Someone got in through their back window last night. 3rd house on this block this month. You should be careful, living alone and all." Charlotte looked at him. Then she looked over her shoulder at Tino, sitting perfectly still in the hallway behind her like he was already listening. "I'll be okay," she said. She believed it. She was right. It was 3:17 in the morning when Tino started barking. Not his regular bark. Charlotte had learned all his barks by then. The mail truck bark, the raccoon in the trash bark, the Eli's stirring in the crib bark. She knew every single one. This was none of those. This came from somewhere much deeper, sharp, relentless, a sound that came through the walls and pulled her upright before her brain had even finished waking up. Charlotte was in Eli's doorway in 11 seconds flat. The Doberman was already at the back sliding door, 90 pounds of completely locked, rigid muscle, every single bit of his attention fixed on something moving in the dark courtyard outside. Cleo was pressed flat against the wall right beside Eli's crib, silent, still. Even the 7-pound Chihuahua knew something was very wrong tonight. Charlotte grabbed her phone, looked through the glass. A figure was moving along the back fence line, moving slow and low, hood pulled up, not walking like someone who belonged anywhere near that yard. She dialed 911. Her hands were shaking. She gave the address, stayed on the line. Tino did not bark again, not once. He just stood there, 90 pounds of absolute silence, pressed against the glass, amber eyes locked at that figure outside with the kind of stillness that is somehow louder than any sound. The person outside stopped, looked up at the window, saw the Doberman staring back, turned around, walked fast, then ran. He was gone before the patrol car even turned on her street. The responding officer swept the courtyard with a flashlight, found fresh shoe prints pressed deep into the dirt along the fence line, marks on the sliding door latch, tested from the outside. Whoever it was had already started working on the lock. The officer stood in Charlotte's kitchen and looked at Tino sitting quietly beside her leg. Then he looked at her. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "that dog is the only reason we are having this conversation right now instead of something a whole lot worse." Charlotte didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she crouched down, put both arms around the Doberman's neck, and stayed there for a long time. Tino didn't move. He just let her hold on, like he'd been waiting for exactly that. Today, Eli is 14 months old. Tino is 6. Cleo is 10 years old and runs that apartment with the quiet authority of someone who has been in charge since before anyone else arrived. which honestly, she has. Tino still does his morning rounds every single day, without fail, still finds the left sock every evening, still sleeps in the hallway between the front door and Eli's room, like he drew up that assignment on his very first night and never reconsidered it once. Charlotte got a job offer last week. She told her college friend she wasn't worried about leaving Eli at home. Her friend asked why. Charlotte just smiled. He's not going to be alone. The family that gave Tino away said he was too much, a 90-pound Red Doberman, too energetic, too possessive, too intense for a house with a baby coming. Charlotte has a baby and a Chihuahua and that same Doberman, and she sleeps through the night now. The dog one family decided was too much turned out to be exactly enough for another family that needed him, not because anyone trained him for it, not because anyone asked, because from the very first morning he walked through that apartment checking every door and every window, he had already decided this was his family now, and he was going to take care of them. Some dogs don't need permission to love someone completely. They just need someone to open the door and let them stay. Was Tino always a guardian? Or did one woman, one baby, and one very small Chihuahua make him one? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever taken in a dog the world had already given up on, share their story below. Someone scrolling tonight really needs to read it.